We're here to idea everyone, to fire up your curiosity and connect you with the people and ideas that shape our world. Watch, listen, understand, connect, create. Let's move the human story forward together. Welcome to ideaXme. I'm Neil Koenig. For more than 50 years, the Serpentine Gallery in London has shown work by some of the world's most famous contemporary artists. But it does not normally have figures like this on top of it. In fact, this creature is a product of augmented reality and is only viewable through a smartphone app provided by an enterprise called Acute Art. It is all part of New Fiction, the first major solo exhibition in London by the artist KAWS, and it features paintings and sculptures as well as digital elements. Not only that, a parallel digital version of the show has been launched simultaneously in Fortnite, the hugely popular video game developed by Epic Games. The artistic director of Acute Art and the curator of the New Fiction show is Daniel Birnbaum. Daniel, many thanks for joining us. Perhaps we can begin by asking you to tell us a little bit about yourself and how you ended up working with Acute Art.
Thank you so much. Happy to join this. I am an art world person in the old sense, maybe. I've been working for museums and biennials and art schools all of my life. So the art part of things is nothing new. The whole AR, VR, art and technology conversation is also perhaps not new in my life. It's only 3 years ago that I joined this endeavor here in London. I have a background in philosophy and art history, and started to work with artists when I was relatively young. And curation back then wasn't really a profession. Of course, it was for people who worked at museums, but to be, an accomplice of an artist or a friend, you write a little text and then you help the artist installing things. That's how it all began for me. And I became more and more involved with artists. I am Swedish, so I lived in Sweden. I lived in Stockholm, but I have also been living in the German-speaking world. That's why I sound like this. So I lived in Vienna and in Berlin, and I started to work with artists more on a kind of hobby level, maybe. But it grew into my profession somehow. I started to teach at art schools, and one thing led to another, and my first job, real job, so to say, was to be an art critic for a big daily paper. And then I worked for a kind of studio program in Stockholm. And at some point I became, involved with one of the better known art schools in Germany called the Städelschule in Frankfurt. And to my surprise, I was asked if I would run the whole school. And I was a relatively young dean, not that young, but most deans in Germany are, elderly gentlemen with a beard, and I wasn't that yet. But the school also had a Kunsthalle, a kind of gallery, which is quite well known. It's called the Porticus. It is not a major museum, but it's one of the art world's best known venues, and does not show, it doesn't show students' work. It shows, we always invited guests. So we had Gilbert and George, or we had John Baldessari, or we had, major artists. So I became a curator on a professional level. And I started to be involved with the biennials. There was a period in the 1990s when the art world seemed to grow. It used to be very, Paris-centered, the whole thing, like a century ago. And then maybe New York became the center of the art world. London was not very important back then, but step by step, London became a very important new city. This is maybe a surprise for people in London, but it actually happened in the 1990s, I would say, through the new Tate Modern and through Frieze Art Fair and up the magazine Frieze, and I became very interested in London. You know, in the maybe through technology and cheap flights and all of that, the art would seem to grow, and suddenly there were biennials all over the world. And with a few friends, I was involved with many of them in Moscow and in Yokohama outside Tokyo, and in Italy, and then in 2009, I was then suddenly, you know, involved with the Venice Biennale as the artistic director of the whole thing. And that is a scary task, but also a symbolic, important job to do once if you have chosen this strange career of being a curator. It's when you are attacked by everyone, but it's also when people take you seriously because it is an important moment. So I've been, you know, writer and a curator of very, very small and then occasionally of very large projects. After that, I kind of slowed down, one maybe say, but maybe I also became a little bit more serious, and I became the director of a museum called the Moderna Museet, and it's not as influential and big as the Tate or the MoMA, but it's a paradigmatic museum of modern art, actually a very important one in my hometown, Stockholm. I did that for almost a decade. And actually that may, you know, maybe a little bit of importance for our conversation today, because Moderna Museet was in the 1960s perhaps the most experimental museum in Europe, and also rich and kind of, you know, Sweden had not been part of World War II, and it was relatively open to new impulses from the US, and the Moderna Museet was the first place to show Andy Warhol in Europe, and the whole pop development happened there. And there was an interesting development that had a little bit of a Swedish link called EAT, Experiments in Art and Technology. It was a Swedish engineer, but he actually lived in the US, called Billy Cleaver, who became the kind of top engineer in the art world. It's maybe surprising that there would be an engineer in the art world, but he helped Robert Rauschenberg and John Cage and even Warhol to do you know, experimental things involving new tech. And Moderna Museet has, you know, a great collection of such strange things, and we always looked at that and did shows and conferences about EAT and art and technology. But then I met a group of people who were interested in new digital possibilities, you know, that are also visually interesting. VR, virtual reality, and AR, augmented reality. We will speak about those concepts. There was a conference in Stockholm with the humble, you know, name Brilliant Minds. And it did actually involve quite brilliant minds from Obama to you know, important writers and whatnot. And I was asked to kind of make a conversation there. So I started to invite, it happened a number of times, and I invited very important artists. And then I was asked to you know, to propose artists that would use these new technologies by a little group. And these are the people who actually in the end founded this place where I now work, Acute Art. But at the beginning, I was simply an advisor. So we did works with a number of artists, and they said, you know, let's see what happens if very important artists, not just techie, nerdy specialists, but actually major artists use this new technology. And I asked, what do you mean with important artists? And they said, we mean Jeff Koons. So we actually did approach Jeff Koons and Marina Abramovic and Olafur Eliasson and Anish Kapoor, and they all did works, and very different works, but they did VR works. And I thought that was very, you know, very interesting that they would be willing to do this. Actually, you know, these are all fantastic artists, normally known for other things. You know, Marina Abramovic, maybe the most influential performance artist in the world, and Jeff Koons, a perfectionist who is, you know, a sculptor basically. And we had Marina Abramovic, Jeff Koons, and Olafur Eliasson on stage with me. And then I thought, this is interesting. Maybe I should move on. I've been a museum director now for a decade. There are other options in life. And they asked me if I would do this. And here I am 3 years later, and we are still exploring art with artists like that. But of course, not only with the kind of monsters of rock. I mean, we actually work with lots of artists now, young artists from all over the world, but it was a good beginning.
Just before we go any further, let's just be clear about what we mean by these terms, virtual reality and augmented reality. Virtual reality may be slightly easier to grasp in that this often involves the viewer having to put on a kind of headset in order to experience the work that they're looking at. An augmented reality is slightly different, isn't it?
Yes. When people talk about VR, they mean this technology. It's been around for a few years, or actually even decades, I think, for specialists. But real people, who are specializing in these fields, maybe at MIT or similar schools in across Europe. But as a kind of more mainstream possibility, it's actually only, I would say, 5 years old, perhaps, that big companies started to produce headsets, and they were very clumsy at the beginning, and I have to say ugly, and not very appealing, and you don't want to put on that thing. But when you're in it, you forget about the ugliness of your headset, and there you are in a world that is more or less a perfect illusion of a real three-dimensional space. We're only talking about sound and vision. We're not talking about taste or smell, or that would be a perfect simulation of the world. And people, of course, in a science fiction or philosophical context, would speculate about such possibilities. But right now, with sound and vision, and the optical system seems to be the dominant. That if you see something, it's stronger than the smell or the taste. So it actually takes over it becomes a more or less perfect illusion. You may think that you are in a rainforest, or you are catapulted into a sci-fi-like context, or you are actually on the moon, and artists started to explore this a little bit. It's other things are always driving the developments. The gaming world is maybe the biggest one. Historically, even with photography and with the film, also entertainment, and I should mention it, probably pornography is always a driving force, because it's been like that, also historically in the 19th century with photography. And I think the gaming world is the biggest one when it comes to financial power also, that young people love these games, and VR is a possibility for the gaming world. Also real estate, if you want to build an amazing building but you're not 100% sure, you can do it in VR and walk around in your building. Or if you want to, so there are many applications. And I should maybe mention that some of our works are almost hallucinatory fantasies. We did something with Anish Kapoor, as I mentioned, and it's an unbelievable journey through spheres. I think you're falling into yourself, and that's how he talks about it. So you're somehow inside your body, but then you enter spaces that I don't know what those spaces are, but I would say maybe they're the soul, and possibly it's about reincarnation, that you pass away and that you reappear. And so we've done very kind of visually strange things that are almost like hallucinations or dreamlike. But we've also done very direct, I would say, political works. We did a piece with Ai Weiwei, the Chinese artist, and that is pretty straightforward and technologically not so impressive. But it's film. We simply used 360 cameras to produce the sense of immersion, that you're in another part of the world, and it's a piece about refugees and about wild animals, or homeless elephants, basically. And it's a very authentic piece for Weiwei. It's at the center of his interests in the issues of migration and basically the predicament, the condition of life on the planet.
So VR, because of the technology, because at the moment you have to wear a headset, it's kind of only really practical if you go somewhere. If you go to a space, you go to a gallery, you're going to put this device on, there are going to be people there to show you how to access it, and so on. But there's another this other phenomenon, augmented reality, is a rather different case, isn't it?
Augmented reality is similar, but the imagery or the digital components that have been created, they don't show up in a space that is closed off from the rest of the world. So you can see it through a telephone or through an iPad or through a kind of half transparent headset if you want that. So you look into the world, but there is stuff there that is not real. It's digital or virtual, and it shows up in the environment. So you can weave digital components into the social sphere, for instance. You look into your street and there's your well-known street corner, but there's some object there, or there's a creature there, or maybe a person that you recognize, or a sculpture, or a monster, and that's AR being woven into the real environment. So of course it's less spectacular, perhaps, because VR, when you're totally closed off, becomes the most powerful visual medium there has ever been. It can be stronger than cinema because it takes over and you're in it. You're totally immersed in a kind of fictional world. And there you are, and you can't escape it, because it's, wherever you go, you have to take off the headset if you want to escape it, or turn it off or something. And you are overwhelmed, basically. AR is a little bit less that, of course, because everything that shows up on a telephone, even if you have a very large telephone, will be a little bit more, you're never going to be frightened, and it can be a little bit gimmicky. Some of the AR things that are out there are more like fun smileys or things that you can place there or something. When we work with it, we have done collaborations with institutions all over Europe and other parts of the world, and we have worked a lot with some places here in London, for instance, the Serpentine Gallery, and then we have installed perfectly functioning VR headsets in their space. And we've done it at Frieze, and we've done it at many places. There is a lighter form of VR. You can put your iPhone or your smartphone or whatever into a little cardboard box and have it in front of your eyes. And this may not sound very convincing, but it's actually surprisingly strong, that you see VR, and then so that would be mobile VR. And when we launched the Ai Weiwei piece, it actually gave me a little glimpse of things to come. I think this is 2 years ago, and we produced that piece directly with Weiwei, but we had an agreement with The Guardian, the newspaper. They were doing a big story about him, and they had a little conversation here in London at the cinema. And we launched it and in the first hour, I think it reached like 50 or 100,000 people. And it was, and it was actually on YouTube. YouTube now carries the most primitive form of VR, just, 360 films. But if you put them into a headset or into your telephone and put it into a cardboard box, it is already immersive. So, things are developing, but in principle, you're 100% right. VR is, the heavier, more complex art, technology. And for it to be great, we have installed it in institutions, and you go there and you look at it. AR could be on anyone's telephone, and we started to work with that, a little bit some years ago already. But then during the pandemic, all our beautiful VR productions were kind of meaningless, because every institution in the world closed. Every museum here in London, all across Europe, was closed, and I guess everywhere in the world. And people were looking a bit for things to do. And we had a few ideas about AR, and we launched something with a very well-known artist who has a background in street art and graffiti, but he's become a very successful artist in also in the normal art world. And his name is Brian Donnelly, but he has this, he's called KAWS, KAWS. That was just a tag. He had a kind of a graffiti background, as I say, but he's become someone who's visible all over, and he has incredibly successful collaborations with the commercial brands in the fashion world and the sportswear and all of that. And we did his kind of classical well-known figure called Companion. It's just a kind of, he looks like a mixture of a Mickey Mouse and some other components from the world of comics, but it's become his kind of almost alter ego like character. And we launched that as a kind of AR object and placed in different parts of the world, Piccadilly Circus and Times Square in New York, and well-known site in Tokyo. And I think we had 12 cities actually. And the interest was huge. It was only up for a few days. CNN ran a story about it, and it showed that AR is something that could actually be an art form.
How did the audience experience it? This event?
Yeah. So again, one can do AR, in different ways. And so these big sculptural works were actually geolocated, so through GPS systems, one can say it's going to be, outside of Buckingham Palace, or it will be hovering above the White House. I don't think anyone could stop us from that, actually. Maybe they can, I don't know. But then you have to go there, and there's nothing you can see with your naked eye. You have to be there. And if you look at that site through a telephone, or rather through an app on a telephone, something will appear. So you have to know what you're doing. And normally now that when we do things like that, we're asking people to download the app through a QR code and to point the camera in a specific direction. I have to say, it's still not perfect. The technology is still, full of challenges, but young people seem to understand this better than people my age. And then, we did a show. The first time we did something that we pretended would be a real art event, in the normal sense, was something we did with a magazine here in London called Dazed. Dazed is this well-known lifestyle, fashion, pop music magazine. And our offices are on the Strand. So they're our neighbors and we know them. And we said, let's do a kind of low budget, or actually no budget experiment. We take a lot of art pieces that we produced and place them somewhere and pretend that this is a biennial or something. And that's in a way what we did. So along the river between Waterloo Bridge and Tate Modern, we placed, I think, 35 objects, and one could walk there and look at them through the camera. And in the middle of the lockdown, or rather when not complete lockdown, but when you were not allowed to do much and all institutions were closed, we actually had thousands of people there looking, playing around. And I don't know if everyone loved it, but there was nothing else. So it was a good moment. And we had some very well-known artists there, like Olafur Eliasson, the Danish Icelandic artist who many people remember from the Tate, where he did a big sun. That was probably his most successful show ever. And now the sun reappeared, but it was an AR object and it was hovering outside of the Tate, and you could see it on the phone, and you can of course take photos of it or even film it and send it to your friends. So it is a digital or social media based art form, perhaps, because it can.
So that's another way of the audience can experience the thing, because of course the screen of a phone is quite small, but if you take a picture, maybe you can look at that later on your laptop, put it on your TV.
And you can involve yourself. So the world of social media, as we know, often the same psychological forces that created the kind of selfie craze can be in place again, and you can be in the picture yourself, or you can ask your friend to film you underneath Olafur's AR sun and then put it on your Instagram account. And so, that of course wouldn't maybe be experiencing the art. It would be experience images of the art, but it has a possibility to reach audiences far outside of the normal art world and totally outside of the structures that I have been working with, like galleries, museums, art fairs, biennales, all of that. So in a way, one can talk about this as a kind of popular or populist possibility, but it's also, somehow an interesting democratizing possibility that, not only people who live in a major city like London or Berlin or New York, or where there are fantastic museums, can experience this. AR and VR, if this develops the way I think it will, can be, a medium that can be, it's already there in a way. It can be anywhere. If you have access to the internet, you can be in these spaces. And it's still early days, of course, but I wouldn't be surprised if this develops into a very, very strong alternative to the classical art forms.
I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the production process, because it sounds a little bit like making film, making video, which can get incredibly expensive and involved, and you need some serious funding if you're going to keep doing that over and over again on a large scale.
Absolutely. I think the comparison with film and television, all of that is very correct, because when people ask me about this, like, how do you do things, or how an artist do this? The truth is, of course, that some artists, younger artists, I would say, who have grown up with digital devices, who actually are at home in these worlds, maybe have a background in gaming or something like that, they actually do it themselves. And then there are specialists, and we work with some of these people who would work maybe for the big commercial, Warner Brothers, Disney, whatever, but they also want to do things in a more, let's say, artistic environment. And we put together small teams when we do VR works. So if someone wants to do a very, very shiny surface, like Jeff Koons, we have people from the car industry who know how to do very shiny surfaces. And it's true that it's, a collective studio thing. On the other hand, if you produce a little pop video or a film, that's how it's done. So very few people would be, capable of doing this alone. And it's true that it becomes, rather expensive. But to produce, a sculptural work in AR is not the same as demanding as to produce a kind of illusion like what we did with Anish Kapoor or Marina Abramovic. But, of course, it's a bit, some artists are at home in these worlds, and we are working with some artists who could have done it themselves, but they can do more ambitious projects if they have a whole team helping them. There's a Chinese artist with whom we work called Xiao Fei, actually quite well known now. She had shows across the world, and she's at home in the digital world. Already 20 years ago, she was experimenting with something that we all forgot about called Second Life. It was a kind of early, if you want, a kind of virtual reality-like project. And now she's doing AR and VR. And we have a few other younger artists who are very at home in these things. But if we work with, we did something even with Anthony Gormley. And is there a more ambitious person in the classical sculpture world, from Rodin to Henry Moore to Anthony Gormley? That's where I would see him. So it's kind of surprising that he would do a virtual reality project, but he did something with us together with an astrophysicist called Priya, great scientist working in the US, in Indian. And we did a kind of journey to the moon, and Anthony Gormley was very interested in the moon as a sculptural object. He more or less claimed the moon as his piece, with very interested in its texture and its how the density of that object. And of course, they could not have done this and would not have done this had we not offered them a possibility. And so some people say, is it not a bit strange? But we thought it was very interesting that artists who are well known for other things, what happens to them if they get access to visual tools that they wouldn't normally have?
So what are you? What is Acute Art doing? Are you
Ah,
kind of
yeah.
do you suddenly find yourself kind of joining the artist's studio, or are you a gallery, uh, or are you a museum? I mean, it's quite difficult to find an analogy in the classical world, isn't it?
I totally agree. So, I mean, I would say that we're some sort of studio with the curatorial ambitions, that we don't just produce and then we leave it, because we think that we want to do things with artists, and then we want to find with great artists, not just people who are, convincing us or paying for it or something, but that, it should be important art, and then we try to find places to show it. So the Ai Weiwei thing with the Guardian would be a typical example. From a more financial point of view, I'm not the CEO, I'm the artistic director. So I see it primarily as a curatorial, fantastic possibility, very experimental, and, an incredible chance to see what happens when a new medium arrives. But, it is like a startup company that people put private money into it. A little bit like in the art, the art world is full of people who are willing to spend a lot of money on buying things and selling things and paintings and sculptures. And we haven't really developed, a financial income model. But we have always thought that if we produce important things with such important artists, they're not worthless. And to be totally explicit, and we have also worked a little bit with commercial brands just to find ways to make this sustainable in the long run. We did a very beautiful book that had an AR component with Chanel. We did all BMW's art cars in AR. We are now working with Fortnite, the gaming company. We have produced an interesting thing with the wonderful British artist David Shrigley for a champagne brand called Ruinar. So, just like the art world, somehow has to find ways to make some money, not only spend money. We have been looking into these things. We haven't gone super far in that direction, but I mean, these were pretty strong examples. No, I mean, we are willing to do things if someone else pays for it occasionally.
Are you looking into the phenomenon, the NFT phenomenon?
Yes, I mean, and in a way, it's interesting how much certain tendencies or processes were speeded up by the pandemic. That we believed in the visual possibilities here, and in the general the development of the world, and that this will come and become more and more important and visible. And maybe not, I wasn't thinking, the pandemic no one knew about, but I was always thinking that in the future with the climate crisis, the art world as I knew it is not a sustainable kind of structure. People flying to another continent to look at art that was also taken there by airplanes, and then you fly home. And I mean, now I'm talking about the commercial art world with the big fairs in Hong Kong and Miami and LA and everywhere. They will survive, but maybe that whole world of total globalism seems a bit crazy now. Also, the world of biennials. I was never actually in the commercial art world, but I was probably one of the worst people in the world when it comes to flying to another continent to install some piece and then fly back home. And I just thought that art world will not survive always, thank God. And other parts of society are more important than the city art world, but the art world is sometimes, what John Cage called an early alarm system, that, things happen there and you can see where we're going. And the art world is somehow shows the best and the worst of humanity, incredible pathological greed and fetishism, but also, full of visionary people thinking of other models and all of that. So, I thought all of this would become very important, but maybe in a few years. And then came the pandemic, and we were all locked into our apartments, and no one could do anything. And clearly, things changed, and people became very interested in these things. And part of this development is also that the commercial art world somehow joined in, not the normal art world, because these were, only artists working in the digital sphere, but suddenly there was a possibility to commercialize digital assets. And that's what you, just referred to, the NFT, non-fungible tokens. It's actually not an art form. It's more like a way to secure digital objects and create additions and scarcity in the digital sphere. And some of these things became, cult objects and were sold for immense sums. Of course, most of them are not, but you can produce a little AR component and you can secure it as a unique object with blockchain technology. And it's, yes, an NFT is something that someone can own. We have produced an NFT, but it was never, in the marketplace where people could bid. So we're already looking into this, and we are, of course, thinking that a lot of the stuff that we have produced, at some point, we've always said it will be additions, and the blockchain technology that I didn't know so much about, but now I'm learning. And people in this world have always said that when the moment you want to create an addition and say there are 5 of these videos, or there are 2 of these objects, you will use that. And then, and then came the NFT craze, which is still going on. And we will see how it develops. But if artists are going to continue doing this, they have to be able to make some sort of, money from it. And that will, we will explore that more in the future, of course, not only through, associations with brands, but actually to see if they can enter collections of digital art.
Now, you mentioned just now collaborating with Fortnite. Tell us about this project.
Yeah, so it's been a bit secret, because working with Fortnite is a little bit like working with the Vatican or something, and it's Brian Donnelly, KAWS, who has a relationship to that company. But there's been a lot of talk about the metaverse. It's almost like, an alternative universe for some people. But some young people maybe spend more time in Fortnite or in Minecraft or whatever, these different games, than in their schools, unfortunately. But it's an interesting development. So Brian KAWS was asked to do a more ambitious project, and said if we would be part of it. And then I asked my friends at Serpentine Gallery if we could reproduce the entire museum, the whole gallery, in a game. And
what?
they so we have done a replica of the Serpentine Gallery, and it looks very real, and it opens now. And so people in the gaming world will enter. When they enter the game, they enter something called the hub. So at the center of the game, there is a replica of Serpentine Gallery. Hyde Park looks very strange, but the building itself looks perfect. And so you can actually go into a replica of an exhibition of paintings and sculptures. And I have curated a physical show, and that physical show has 25 paintings in it, and an exact version of that now shows up in Fortnite. And 10 years ago, when I was the director of the Venice Biennale, I think we reached 500,000 people. I think we will, have 20 times that in the first day. So it's an incredibly strange thing that it will be, without doubt, the best attended exhibition that I've ever been involved with. I would actually, say that I think it's going to be the best attended exhibition ever produced. Maybe someone else would do something even stronger in the future, but they are not. The numbers are never official, but my guess is it's like 10 million people a day or something, whatever that means. People are in it as as part of their gaming. It's a non-violent zone. They cannot shoot and kill each other in the art world. Well, that was our requirement. Because some of these games, of course, are playful, but they're also very brutal, and people kill each other. That there's no killing in the exhibition.
I hope not. What kind of work is on show in the in the Serpentine in both worlds.
Yeah, so KAWS has many people know his work because it's been so visible through his collaborations with big brands, but he's also producing quite classical paintings. They're increasingly abstract. He produced his own vocabulary of these characters that he has developed. They are, almost like a mix of everything known from American subculture or the world of comics, from Disney to SpongeBob to Simpsons. All of that has been broken down and atomized, and now it's showing up just like shapes, as if you would shoot all of America through pop cultural America through the canvas, and the canvases are sometimes totally abstract, and you can only someone who would know what the background of these shapes are could maybe get a glimpse of those characters. So it's 25 more or less abstract paintings, and the same paintings show up in the game. And then we have actually added one more layer, and that will not be visible in the game, but for people who get into this and find out a little bit about it, they can actually get access to all the works and a small dollhouse version of the Serpentine on the Acute Art App. And you can then place those paintings in your living room if it's big enough. Some of those paintings are pretty big, but you can have them hovering in your garden also. So in a way, it's a world, or rather it's an exhibition that lives in three worlds. A physical exhibition in Hyde Park, in one of the better known art spaces in this country. AR versions of all the pieces that you can have at home. Or if you're a gamer, and some people are, a perfect replica in the game.
Well, that raises an interesting question. You mentioned that there are actual physical paintings on show, as well as these additional digital layers. The paintings may well last for tens, possibly hundreds of years without needing too much restoration work. The digital layers, though, are a different matter. You can store digital files maybe now in the cloud, and they'll keep on being backed up. But the devices that you might consume the digital files through, the headsets, the smartphones and so on, these are changing all the time. So how are you, particularly if you're creating work that needs to be preserved, that's a bit of a challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, I wish you wouldn't have mentioned this. No, it is a challenge, of course, and it's something that I've been thinking about, and there are a few different aspects to this question, I feel. Some people would say, isn't it a problem that the technology is so fast that 3 years later the work looks obsolete already? And that can be true. I would actually admit that some of the things that Acute Art made, before I even joined, and I was just a little bit involved as an advisor, these first works are perhaps already a little bit old. And they could have looked different, and there are new possibilities. And at the same time, I don't think that an Ingmar Bergman movie is bad just because you can see it was produced in the 1950s, or a Russian avant-garde film made in the 20s is very interesting. Or to come closer to the art world, maybe an early video work by Joan Jonas or Bruce Nauman. They feel a little bit old, but they are beautiful. And I think, I'm not sure all of the things that we have produced are on that level, like Ingmar Bergman or Bruce Nauman, but I would think that some of them are, because they are pioneering works with a new medium. And, once or twice in every century, there's a new medium that changes everything, from photography through cinema, through video, and the television. And here we have a cluster of new possibilities, and people are exploring this. And some of these works, I think, will be classics. The other question that you have is something of which is complicated. How should these things be stored? How do we know? I mean, I have an example that just shows how difficult it is in a world that is a little bit older. I think it's now almost 20 years ago that I was invited to MIT maybe the most important technical university in the world, to present a little show out of a video collection in the US. And I could select whatever work I wanted. In the end, it was a small show with 8 pieces or something. And many of the works we could not show. We simply could not find the devices. It wasn't possible. It's actually a very famous collection called the Kramlish collection. The Kramlish are a couple very well-known art people, and one could have done it, but it would have been very difficult and expensive, and I didn't want to spend the budget just on trying to find a special device. And they had so much works that we did a beautiful show with the things we could show. But it did show that even with the MIT as a context, it was hard. So, it's been around for a while that, film, video, all of this stuff, not so easy. And now with the incredibly fast developments in digital technologies, I think this is going to be a big issue.
You spent a long time in the art world, both in the sort of more classical end and the more cutting edge, at least from the technological point of view, end of it. How do artists who are not warm to the idea of technology, how do they respond to this? Do they think this isn't a serious enterprise, or those of a more traditional mindset? How would you win them over?
Well, I don't want to win them over. I think it's fine that someone is a painter and should be a painter. And I think, I wouldn't ask Brancusi to join the NFT world. I think he's, perfect where he is. And I don't think that, every artist should do television or video either, even if those mediums have been around now for half a century or more, actually. We have conversations with artists who are close to these mediums already, but then we did do, a few things with artists who are known for other things, like Marina Abramovic in the end did a beautiful piece about herself. That's her theme, an interesting avatar who's trying to save the world. And Jeff did a kind of perfect shiny ballerina, and more shiny and more perfect than anything he could have done in the real world. And they all had their reason to kind of explore it, but it could very well be that these artists are very interesting to work with once or twice, but they're not going to be the defining artists in these new in this world of new mediums. I think someone like Chao Fei, for instance, is more at home, and we've already done 2 or 3 works with her, and I think she's going to continue. And there will be younger artists who enter this world with the background that makes it feel totally natural for them. So we've been going in different directions, and at the same time, it's been fun to work with artists who are actually known for in other fields, just to see how what can they do in this medium that they couldn't have done. So in a way, we would never just want to reproduce some piece of sculpture or painting in this world. We would see, can one do something that could not be painted, that could not be an installation, that could not be a piece of sculpture? That's the challenge, and that's the kind of fun of it. So, and I think they all did things that are, far beyond what they could have done in their classical mediums. Even, Anish Kapoor, who does these beautiful spaces, suddenly he did this journey within, and he couldn't have done that as a shiny object or a sculpture. It needed this medium.
Yeah, so you may be witnessing people moving from one medium to the other. You may find some young artists start in the digital world and end up in the physical world. I mean, it's a fascinating time.
I mean, the hybrid possibility, or whatever you want to call it, of things being, both. I mean, this Fortnite collaboration is an example that there is, and that's what makes it a bit, special, that it's a small, dense show in one of the better known classical art institutions, and then it's everywhere and nowhere in the game. That is interesting, and I think one can do. I produced a little magazine recently. There's, the street, Cork Street in Mayfair, where some of the better galleries are, and also historically very important galleries were located there, the Peggy Guggenheim Gallery. And they have a little journal that I was asked to guest edit last year. And they always ask someone from someone to come up with a theme. And we placed a few AR works there in the street. That was not like a big blockbuster show at all, but it happened during Freeze. But the object, the physical object, the journal, actually has QR codes that triggers these artworks. So whoever has that little journal has a little exhibition also. It makes me remember strange objects that the founder of conceptual art, Marcel Duchamp, he made these objects like miniature museums. And these are almost like, it's almost like we produce a little version of something like that for the virtual age, that people can bring home a little magazine that they can read and, put in their next to books, but it actually has a secret world built into it. So it's a kind of hybrid object, a kind of physical virtual thing. And I wouldn't be surprised if the more traditional art world, who always finds, they always find a way to make money, that there will be sculptural works that are also, also virtual. That when you put your camera or your iPad or whatever it is next to it, something happens and there's a hidden dimension. We've done a few things already. I mean, this magazine is a version, but maybe this is the future, that the art world will not be virtual or digital, but it will also not be totally physical. It will maybe be both. So maybe that hybrid world is the future of art.
And that's how you see it developing over the next 5 years?
Yes. I think some people will stick to what they do, and I'm happy Gerhard Richter is still a painter. And some people love experimenting with new possibilities, and why not? I think the whole art world is changing. You don't have to be a philosopher or a sociologist or Michel Foucault to understand that if you lock in everyone on this planet into their apartments, you introduce a few new, very spectacular visual possibilities, new mediums basically for art. And then on top of that, there's a climate crisis that makes you feel bad, if you fly. Things will change, institutions will change, artistic possibilities will change, our way of communicating with each other, and the art world being just a microcosm, somehow mirroring the whole the real world, I think, will change too. And there will be museums, and that's a good thing. But there will also be entirely new kinds of platforms, I think.
Daniel Birnbaum, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for being with us for this episode of the ideaXme Show. ideaXme is a global platform. Our mission is to move the human story forward by sharing knowledge of the future. You can find us on all major audio networks at www.radioideaXme.com, on YouTube and Vimeo. Please subscribe.